Welcome to the Write Better Fiction podcast, the show that helps you, well, write better fiction. I'm Shane Miller, urban fantasy author, writing coach, and story geek, and each week I'll be talking to industry experts about the writing craft, publishing, and the business of being an author. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to episode 17 of the Write Better Fiction podcast. Today I'm super excited because I'm chatting to best-selling dark fantasy romance author and YouTube sensation Jenna Moreci, all about her craft guide for writers, Shut Up and Write the Book. So stay tuned for that. There'll be no update from the writing chair this week because I am away at Jay Thorne's Author Business Mastermind in Cleveland as this episode airs. As for question of the week, I'll ask this week's question and I will read out the answers to last week's question when I get back from my trip on the next show. As a reminder, last week's question was, what's the last novel you read that you couldn't put down? And this week's question is, do you prefer reading in ebook, paperback, hardback, or audiobook, and why? If you want early access to episodes and exclusive access to the Fictioneer community on Discord, where you can take part in things like Question of the Week and weekly accountability, you can support the show on Patreon for as little as $5 a month. Head over to patreon.com/writebetterfiction. When I reach 50 patrons, I'm going to start recording a patron-only exclusive Q&A to answer all your writing questions. Okay, that's about it from me this week, so let's get into the interview with Jenna. Hello and welcome to the Write Better Fiction podcast. Today I'm joined by Jenna Moreci. Jenna Moreci is a best-selling dark fantasy romance author and writing craft author, as well as a YouTube sensation with hundreds of thousands of subscribers. Her first installment in the Saviors series, The Saviors Champion, which I highly recommend, by the way, was voted one of the best books of all time by Book Depository, as it damn well should be. Hi, Jenna. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It is an honor and a privilege.
Oh, you're so welcome. I feel the same. So let's start then by you telling us a bit about you and your journey into writing.
My journey goes as far back as elementary school, way back when I was 6 years old, in first grade. Once a week, we would have a day in class devoted to quote unquote writing books, which was just, pieces of paper, and we bind it with construction paper and we'd illustrate it. My very first book was called The Funeral, and it was about a dead cat, which honestly just makes sense now that I'm an adult with all the violence I write. I promise I hate animals, and I'm not crazy like that. I love animals. My dog is here right now. Yes. But yeah, it did spark an interesting conversation between my teacher and my mom. But anywho, from that point on, I was hooked. I knew I wanted to be a writer. I started studying this craft of storytelling literally from that point forward. And of course, this was the 90s and the early 2000s, and back then it wasn't as accessible. There were higher barriers of entry into the writing field, so I received a lot of backlash, a lot of people telling me you're going to have to pick a more realistic job because you're not going to be able to make a living doing this. So by the time I reached college, I had sort of given up on the writing dream, and I got one of those realistic jobs. I majored in finance, and I became a stockbroker and then an accountant. And I hated it. After a few years in that industry, I was looking into getting a new job, and I realized that all the other options for me were things that I hated even more. I'm like, I don't want to do any of this. And so I had some reflection, and I thought, okay, you know what? Writing has been my passion my whole life. I am going to give it a shot. So I was still working full-time in finance, but when I'd come home from work and on the weekends, I started working on my debut novel. And I told myself that my goal was to make it a lucrative side gig. And if that didn't work out, at least I could say I tried. I gave it a shot. So, and I knew, I had that confirmation that this wasn't for me. Excuse me. So I started working on that book. Years passed, and I suffered a family tragedy. My then boyfriend, now husband, Cliff, broke his spine. So I quit my job so that I could sign on to be his full-time caregiver. And during that process, you don't go through something like that and and have it not change you. It sort of changed my outlook on life and taking risks and how, I could, be gone tomorrow. So I want to make the most out of my life now. So once he was well enough where I could start pursuing career things and he didn't need me all the time, I looked into YouTube. Which sounds strange, but at that point, for years, people had been telling me, you should start a YouTube channel about writing. You'd be great at it. You have, this very bubbly personality. And I had always thought, hell no, I don't want my face on the internet. There's nothing appealing about it. But once we went through that, medical emergency, it kind of changed my outlook. I decided to give YouTube a shot. My goal was 100 subscribers, and now we are just shy of 300,000 subscribers. It completely changed the game for me, and because of starting my writing channel on YouTube, not only was I able to surpass making writing a lucrative side gig, writing is now my full-time job, and I'm making a hell of a lot more as a writer than I did in finance, working that quote unquote realistic safe job. So,
yeah, you are damn right.
So it all worked out.
Yeah, that's
the hell
awesome.
with realistic jobs.
Yeah, they're shit. Like, why would you want a realistic job? No.
Exactly.
Yeah, I did the same thing, apart from I went into insurance instead of finance, but very similar. And I feel like that's a common thread for most writers. Yeah, not good.
Yeah, you're like, okay, this is gonna pay the bills, and then you turn into fuck paying the bills. Yeah. I can't take this anymore.
Yeah, I need to get out. Yeah, right. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so for those who don't know, I mentioned in your bio that you're a craft author. You wrote the fantastic Shut Up and Write the Book in true Jenna Moreci style. Even the title sounds like you, which is great. In the book, you break down the novel writing process. So what are the 3 most critical parts of this process, and why are they so important?
Some people are going to get mad about this. I will say these are the most critical parts in my opinion, but you do you, boo. The first one I would say is planning. I know the pantsers are going to revolt, but from my experience, I started as a pantser and I couldn't finish anything for literally decades. And it wasn't until I started planning, and that includes researching, outlining, creating character profiles, things like that. Once I started fleshing things out ahead of time, that was the only way I was able to finish my first novel, which turned into a second, a third, and now I have 4.5 books because one's still in the oven. But anywho, I do think that planning is a very pivotal part of the writing process. And even if you are a pantser, I do feel like there are some elements of planning that goes into it. For example, just choosing what you're going to write about. I like to say that's a process of marrying marketing with passion. So you take an idea that you're passionate about, and then you see what elements can you add to it that will make it the most marketable, because every genre can be marketable in some ways. So you look at, the competition out there, you look at the other books available, what about them is performing really well, and you look at the tropes that you like in them. So for example, I write fantasy romance, and there are some tropes that are very popular fantasy romance that I hate, so I'm not going to write them. But there are other tropes that are doing really well. For example, forbidden romance. That's one of my favorite tropes. So that's an easy way to combine passion and marketing for me, because I'm passionate about forbidden romance and it's a marketable, content. So again, I consider that all a part of planning. The next phase is obviously drafting, just getting the words on the page. For a lot of writers, this is their favorite part. For me, it tends to be the most nerve-wracking part, because that's when I feel most vulnerable. I'm writing, I'm tapping at the keyboard, and all I can think is, this is trash. This is bad. because it's the first draft, and so I like to remind people, allow yourself to suck. Just get the garbage on the page. You can fix it later. You just remind yourself you can fix it later. And that goes into the third most important part, which is the editing phase. I like to call it the self-edit, because you're going to do rounds of edits yourself before you ship it off to a professional, and you must ship it off to a professional. But yeah, editing actually is one of my favorite parts of the writing process, unlike a lot of writers, because for me, that's when I finally you get to see the story really take form. You get to see it shine, and it's like, oh, now it doesn't suck anymore. It's starting to make sense. So I think if more people thought of the editing process like that, like, okay, I'm finally making my story shine, then I think that they would have a better time with it.
Yeah, I agree. And I was talking to, I think, a mutual friend of ours, Sasha Black, the other day about how much I hate the first draft. It's like, I'm sat there thinking, this is shit. Nobody's going to want to read this. And then you get to the editing and it's like, oh, thank God, I can see like people might want to read this now.
Yeah, it's so funny because a lot of people love the first draft and then hate the edit, and I am the total reverse. And I have a friend, Haley Turner, who's the same way as me, and I'm like, we understand each other, because the first draft, I'm just so neurotic and like, I know that everything I'm writing is so stupid, but then when I edit it, you actually get to see the improvements, and you get to see, oh, now that sentence actually makes sense, So yeah, I much prefer the editing phase.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. You mentioned something really interesting there. You said passion and marketing. And I know half the audience just withered up and died when you said passion and marketing in the same sentence. But they don't have to be mutually exclusive, right? I think that was one of the key lessons that I learned, that was like, oh, I understand how you can marry the two now.
Right, exactly. And that's something that I like to talk about in Shut Up and Write the Book, because like the example I gave when writing the Savior series, there are lots of fantasy romance tropes that are very marketable, but I don't like them. I'm not going to force myself to write them, like the alpha douche, and that's super popular, but I hate that. Yeah. So no one is telling you to write the marketable stuff you hate. There's always going to be marketable stuff you love. For example, I really love forbidden romance. I really love mythology. And a lot of that is very popular in fantasy romance. I love slow burn. There are tons of marketable concepts you can find that you enjoy and gravitate toward, and you just shove them in your book, because you're going to be even more passionate about it because you're writing something that you love. And then at the same time, when it's time to, the book's done and it's time to market it, you could be like, hey guys, just so you know, this book has forbidden romance, and people are just going to lose their minds. So it's about, finding the marketable aspects that really call to you. It's not about shoehorning yourself into a category that you don't like solely for the purpose of, selling copies.
Yeah, and that's a great way to look at it for sure. You mentioned the dreaded first draft and how this can be a mountain to climb for most authors, and you talked about kind of get through it. How do you navigate this phase, and what advice would you give to those who are struggling?
Well, first and foremost, I would advise to set goals, and I use the quarterly goal method, where I set goals for every 3 months. I really don't recommend setting yearly goals like resolutions and stuff. I mean, people forget about them come February, even sooner than that. So don't even bother with that. I really think 3 months is the perfect amount of time, because it's enough amount of time. It's long enough to give you wiggle room, but it's short enough to keep you motivated, and to keep you on task, and make them, they can be challenging, but don't make them a total mind fuck. Okay. Just usually, for example, my quarterly goals are write 100 pages. And for me as a full-time writer, and also a caregiver, that is challenging, but at the same time doable. So that's a quarterly goal I will set. It's not going to be the same for everyone. If you work full time and you go to school, 100 pages in 3 months might be like totally unrealistic for you. Or maybe you could write 100 pages in a weekend. You know, maybe you're like that. In which case, I am super jealous.
Yeah.
But you know, set these short time frame goals for about 3 months, and don't make the goal quantifiable. I wouldn't say like your goal should be write a book, you know, like that's just, you know, that's too many steps. Break it down into smaller steps. There's this saying, inch by inch, life is a cinch, yard by yard, life is hard. If you break up the writing process into smaller steps, it'll be a lot less overwhelming and you won't get so caught up in the mental fuckery of it all. The next thing I would say is motivation is fleeting. Motivation is not reliable. Some days you're not going to feel like writing. And so if you only write when you're inspired or motivated, you're just not going to finish anything ever. That's just the way it is. So I would say focus instead on creating a habit. So create some kind of routine that works for you and your schedule. So if you work full time, that might mean, you know, I'm going to write for this amount of hours every weekend, or I'm going to write for an hour before work every day. If you are a student, you know, it might be like, I'm going to write, you know, during lunch, or I don't know, you know, figure it out. But basically create a habit. It's going to be easy the first few days because you're going to be excited. Then it's going to be the worst experience of your life for a few weeks. I would say once you get to the 1 month mark, the habit will be instilled and it'll get easier. So just get over the hump, you'll be okay. And then the last piece of advice I would give, and I mentioned this earlier, is just accept the suckage. I know it's hard because I struggle. I'm a full-time author and I still struggle with it. Just grit your teeth and clench your butt cheeks and write the words, even though they suck. Understand that no first draft is good. They all suck. Stephen King's first drafts suck. Everyone's first draft sucks. So just accept that and stop expecting yourself to create perfection right out the gate, because no one can do that. So why should you do it? You know, if we all have to suck, you do too. So just accept that the first draft is going to suck and remind yourself while you're writing, if you're spiraling like, oh my gosh, that paragraph doesn't even make any sense, just tell yourself to shut up and accept the suckage and keep going.
Yeah, I regularly have to tell myself to shut up in the drafting phase, to be fair. It can be like pulling teeth. The way the films portray it, like we just sit down and it flows out and that's it. It's ready to go.
I was writing yesterday. I'm still in the first draft phase with the Savior's Army. And oh my gosh, I was writing yesterday and I had to like pause and have like a deep breath, like, Jenna, it's okay. It's okay. Just write it. Okay. You can fix it later.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Okay, you also write about crafting plot twists that wow the audience, which obviously is essential. How can writers find the balance between a twist that's surprising, yet also feels earned and satisfying? Because we don't just want to spring it on them, right?
Right. And that's something I talk about. A lot of people think the worst sin for a plot twist is predictability. That's not true. In fact, depending on the genre, sometimes certain genres are designed to be more predictable than others. For example, the romance genre, it has a happily ever after. That's a rule of the genre. So if you are too unpredictable and then you say you make the romance end in a tragedy, readers are going to be mad because you just broke a genre rule, you know? So that would be my first point, is understanding the genre and how unpredictable you can go with the plot twist. Certain genres thrive with plot twists. For example, the horror genre, people are usually expecting one, especially toward the end of the book. So understand the genre and how plot twists sort of work into that. And going back to predictability not being the worst sin is like a nonsensical plot twist, a plot twist that feels so overly complicated that it almost feels as though the author doesn't understand it. And usually when I see a plot twist like that, I tend to assume that the writer didn't know what the plot twist was going to be, and they just kind of threw it all together at the end and just try to make it work. So maybe plan the plot twist ahead of time. Another good reason for planning it ahead of time, which this is, I think, the most important part of a plot twist, is include breadcrumbs. Writers call it foreshadowing. I like to call it breadcrumbs. Sprinkle in the tiniest bits of hints, put them in places, or clues, I should say, put them in places where the reader's attention is directed elsewhere. So if the plot twist is that it turns out the love interest is actually the villain, and if they're in a scene where the two characters are fighting and the villain is wearing a mask or something, you could briefly say, like, he narrowed his brown eyes, and in the middle of a fight scene they're going to be focused on the fight. They're probably not going to notice the eye color, and it just so happens the love interest also has brown eyes. So something like that's how you would work in a breadcrumb, so that once they get to the plot twist itself, you want the readers to be like, oh, it all makes sense now, or oh, I didn't see that coming, how did I not see it? You don't want it to be so overly complicated that the readers are struggling to comprehend it in that moment. And also, another thing you don't want to do is make a twist that there was absolutely no way readers could have figured it out. For example, the bad guy turns out to be a character who has never been mentioned in the book whatsoever. That's just a cop-out. Readers are going to be like, well, I couldn't have figured it out even if I tried, because this is the first time we're hearing about this person. And not only does it kind of ruin the fun, but there's no way for the character to be invested in that plot twist because it's brand new information. They haven't, it's if you find out the best friend is really the villain, that's going to be gut-wrenching because readers are invested in that friendship. If you find out Uncle Tom, who has never been mentioned ever before, is the villain, they're not going to give a shit because who the hell is this character? They're just meeting them. So yeah, those would be my tips for writing a good plot twist.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point there. We always talk about how readers need to connect to the protagonist, which is true, but I guess they also need to connect with the antagonist because of the reason you've just said. If you spring some random on them, they're going to be like, well, what's happening?
That's why it's a good idea. A lot of writers recommend introducing the villain early on in the story. Sometimes writers, you won't see the villain until the very end. And that's a big no. At the very least, have henchmen come sooner. And this even applies to books that don't have a quote unquote villain. Sometimes it's nature that's the villain. Sometimes it's a storm brewing. You would want to introduce the issue of weather early on. So you want that to be brought up early so that readers can get invested in it.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so I'm always interested in this when people write nonfiction, because I do too. So what inspired you to write Shut Up and Write the Book? Obviously, you've got your YouTube channel already and stuff, but what inspired you to write this particular book?
Honestly, the fans, the readers, my audience, I've had this channel for almost a decade now. And literally since the beginning, people have been like, when are you going to write a writing craft book? And you have all the material on your channel. And I had just not been like getting around to it. And then finally I was like, all right, I'll do it. Okay. I'm writing it. And also, a big part of why I changed my mind is, I read writing craft books, obviously, because I'm a writer. And I didn't like a lot of them. They felt kind of pretentious. It felt a little bit more like the writer was just kind of fluffing up their own ego, and the very fanciful language and a lot of a roundabout way of describing something that I know to be pretty straightforward and simple. And I would be like, why did you spend an entire chapter describing this when it could have been described in a paragraph, you know? And so I wanted to create the kind of writing craft book that I wish I was finding, one where it just got to the point, cut through the crap, and one that, you know, it felt more conversational, like, you know, two writers discussing the craft together. I don't think, I think a lot of writers take themselves too seriously. At the end of the day, it's just playing make believe and writing it down on the page. We're just having fun. Writing is all about play. It's you know, it's about passion. And I wanted a book that didn't take itself too seriously and cut the crap and got to the point and gave the straightforward, no BS advice.
Yeah, and I've read so many craft books, and I remember the first time, like something I really struggled with early on was the middle plot point, which I think is not uncommon. I think most people struggle with that. But
Yeah.
I read so many books that were so vague or like wordy, and I remember the first time it was just explained to me very, very simply, and I was like, oh, well, what sort of fuss? Like, why
Yeah.
all the fuss?
Right. I tend to believe that if you can't explain something simply, you probably don't understand it
Yeah,
well enough yourself. So when people just like go on and on about something that I know to be simple, I'm like, you shouldn't even be teaching this, okay? Because
yeah.
you're making it way bigger than it needs to be.
Yeah, definitely. And we don't need that. Like, it's hard enough already, to be honest. Although it's fun, it is also challenging.
Right.
So I've heard you described as no nonsense. I've heard you described as someone who uses saucy sarcasm a lot. I haven't seen any evidence of that today. No, I'm just kidding.
None whatsoever.
None
It's a lie.
whatsoever. It's all lies. And that's how kind of that's what characterizes your writing advice, whether that's on YouTube or in the book. So how has your personality and your style influenced your writing process?
Well, starting with YouTube, I'll go there first. When I first started my channel, I was trying really hard to be professional and polite and, you know, a very prim and proper lady as best as I could. And I wasn't getting really any views for a few months. And so I just got to a point where I was like, whatever, no one's watching this anyway. So I'm just going to be myself. I'm going to stop, you know, I'm going to talk the way I normally talk, which is, you know, I can have a bit of a potty mouth. And that's when my channel took off. I remember I was at my sister's bachelorette party and everyone's there like, oh, you're getting married. And I'm there looking at my phone and seeing all these, you know, subscribers rolling in, and I have no one to share this excitement with because I don't want to overshadow the bride. And I'm just there like, oh my gosh, what is happening? All because I started to be myself. And what I learned from that, some people thought, oh, you know, if I cuss a lot, maybe I'll get views. That's not what it is. What it is people are attracted to authenticity. People like people who are themselves and are comfortable in their own skin. It kind of gives other people permission to do the same. So that's something that I learned through YouTube, and I kind of translated it into my writing as well. So when I wrote Shut Up and Write the Book, it was very much going to be my vibe. That would make it the easiest to write. And I feel like that's what people want. They want the authenticity. They don't, you know, if they wanted to read, you know, a prim and proper book, those already exist. They can go ahead and buy it. And that's something that I try and tell other writers, you know, through my channel and through Shut Up and Write the Book. A lot of people are afraid that if they show their authentic self, they are going to alienate their audience. So for example, I knew another person who was starting a YouTube channel, and they're have a similar personality to me. They like to make dick jokes and things like that. But they wanted to keep their channel very professional. And I told them, I was like, why, you know, like, and they're like, well, I don't want to alienate people. But then they're releasing a book that is a lot more authentic to their personalities. So it's, you know, raunchy and, you know, it's got swear words and things like that. And I'm like, well, if you're trying to appeal to this wide crowd, they're going to get the book and it's not going to be what they expect. It's not going to be for them, you know? So I would recommend be yourself, whether you are prim and proper or whether you've got a potty mouth like me. Just be who you are, be authentic in your writing, and it'll alienate kind of the right people. You know, the people who don't want clean writing won't show up, and you'll be getting the correct readership. So for me, you know, I was real on my platform, and I'm real in my books. My books, you know, have swearing, they have, you know, spicy scenes, they've got violence and things like that. And it translates with my YouTube audience because, you know, that's how I am on YouTube. That's how I am in my books. So I wouldn't worry. I guess my point is be authentic in every aspect of your platform, and you will gravitate the type of readers who would enjoy your work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I always think it must be really hard for authors who have a persona that isn't them when they're online, because how hard would that be to interact with people but kind of hold back or lean too, perhaps they're doing it the other way, maybe they're leaning too much into something that they don't actually do, and that must be tough.
Yeah, I tried it and it's not worth it. It's a waste of time and energy, and like I said, at the end of the day, you know, if you're writing a very specific, if you're writing like super hardcore, like very techie sci-fi, then make your platform as nerdy and geeky as you want, because you are going to attract the type of people who want all that techie sci-fi. You know what I mean? Like, just be yourself, and it will translate into your audience, and they'll be the right kind of people to read your book.
Yeah, you heard it. Jenna said, be yourself. You have permission to just drop all the shit and be yourself. Do it. Okay, so this is the Write Better Fiction podcast, and this is my favorite question, so much so that I ask all my guests. So, Jenna Moreci, why do you write fiction?
I mean, from the day I wrote that dead cat story, it has been my lifelong passion. I love storytelling. As a little kid, most girls my age were really into Disney and princesses, and my dad got me really into old school adventure movies. So my favorite movies then and still today were The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, Jason and the Argonauts, Clash of the Titans, the original, of course. We don't talk about the abomination that came later. Those were all, you know, Journey to the Center of the Earth. Those were all my favorite movies, and they all have these epic, violent adventures coupled with romance, and that's what I write to this day. I just like feeling so transported in this world of, you know, action and love, and, you know, heroes who really are good to their partners and things like that. You know, I've loved it ever since I was a little kid, and it never died. My wings were never clipped.
And thank God for that. That is good. And you are yourself to the very end, again, just writing exactly what you want, doing exactly what you want. Perfect.
I do feel like a lot of becoming a successful creative as an adult is relearning your passions from your childhood. You know, like you still need that inner child, and sometimes that gets squashed through adolescence and early adulthood. And I feel like tapping into that inner child as an adult is really key to, you know, being successful in a creative field.
Yeah, definitely. And I write urban fantasy, and every time I go to a family thing, somebody will look at one of my books and they'll be like, oh, that's nice. When are you going to write a real book now? And I'm like, no. It's a real book. You're holding it.
You're exactly. It has pages and everything, you know? Yeah. And the thing is, it's kind of like, well, when are you going to stop being a dick?
Yeah, when are you going to shut the fuck up?
It's so stupid, you know? But at the end of the day, it's like, well, I'm the one who's out here living my dream and making money from it, and you're miserable and pooping on everyone else around you because you're sad. So I shouldn't be saying this. This is your family.
Well said. No, I agree with you. I'm totally on board. Okay. Well said. Okay, so can you tell everyone where they can find out a bit more about you and everything you do?
The most obvious place is YouTube, youtube.com/Jenna Moreci. That's Moreci. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok at Jenna Moreci, so you can find me there. And then obviously you can find my books all over the place. They're available wide, which means they're at all major retailers. We've got the Savior series, which if you like dark fantasy romance, so you like some stabby stab and some kissy kiss, it's for you. You already know that there's going to be lots of violence and swearing, so you are forewarned. And then, of course, if you are new to the writing process and you're struggling, check out Shut Up and Write the Book. And that's available at all major major retailers as well.
And we have a surprise guest.
Yes, we got Butters here. Hello. She just woke up. She's like, hello. What about me? You can find Butters on my YouTube channel as well.
You can. Oh, well, thanks for coming on the show, Jenna. That was great.
Thank you for having me. It was a blast.
I hope you enjoyed the interview with Jenna and picked up a ton of actionable tips on how to write your book. Join me next week when I'll be chatting to Deborah Halverson, the author of Writing Young Adult Fiction for Dummies, all about writing YA fiction. Have a great writing week. Thanks for listening to the Write Better Fiction podcast. Remember to hit subscribe on your favorite podcatcher and leave a review, and we'll chat again next time.